The format for today's event, I will give an introduction briefly to General Votel. I think most of us are aware of who he is. He's touched a lot of our lives in different ways. We've asked him to give us about 15 to 20 minutes worth of remarks, and then he will take a short Q&A at the end. If you have a question that you would like to ask General Votel, please put it into the Q&A feature on the Zoom presentation. At the bottom of your screen, you should see two little bubbles with the letters Q&A underneath it. If you click that, it will give you the opportunity to write in a question. When we get to that portion of the event, I will read the questions to General Votel, and he'll provide the answers, and we'll get to as many as we can. The intent is for these Distinguished Speaker Series events to take place quarterly. So in a few weeks, we should have the announcement up for the January speaker. So please keep an eye on the website, and we hope to see all of you again in January. Moving to General Votel. As most of us are aware, General Votel retired as a 4-star officer, most recently as the commander for U.S. Central Command. In that capacity, he was responsible for U.S. and coalition military operations throughout the Middle East and South Asia. Over almost 40 years, he commanded a substantial number of the special operations units that many of us on this webinar are familiar with, including, as it relates to most of us, having spent a bit of time as the commander for the 75th Ranger Regiment. In fact, when I first met General Votel, he was Colonel Votel, and I was Specialist West. And if you had told me that both of us would end up where we are today, I'm not sure that I would have even known what to respond to that back then. These days, General Votel has a position as the President and CEO of Business Executives for National Security. He also works with a number of other nonprofits. And as a way to say thank you for him being our inaugural speaker today, the U.S. Army Ranger Association has made a donation in his name to the charity of his choice, which was Service to School. In addition, I'm very excited to announce that as of Wednesday, General Votel is a life member of the U.S. Army Ranger Association. So with that, General, we thank you for agreeing to be with us today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, thanks, Travis. I did receive my plaque here. I appreciate it. It's great to be associated with you guys. And thanks for that very kind introduction, Travis. You've done well for yourself as well, and it's always good to see a young Ranger doing well down the line here. And thanks to all of you for being here this evening. I'm very honored to participate. Mike Hall reached out to me and mentioned this to me, and suggested that I take it on, and I'm very glad to do that. I'm glad to be your inaugural speaker here for what I hope is a great series for you. You know, the organizations like this, like the U.S. Army Ranger Association, really, I think, play a really key role in our society, certainly for all of our veterans, and for this case, for our Rangers out there. I've known about this organization for a long time. I understand the mission here of preserving heritage and spirit of Army Rangers by strengthening relationships between Rangers across all the years. Really an incredibly important service that you provide. And for those of us who were fortunate to grow up in the Ranger Regiment and be around this, you know, you join a long roster of great organizations: the Merrill's Marauders Association, the Ranger Battalions, World War II Ranger Battalions, the Ranger Infantry Companies of America, you know, representing the Korean War, and Vietnam, separate companies, and of course 75th Ranger Regiment Association among them that do a great job. These are incredibly important and necessary forums, I think, that provide connections and then, you know, promote public understanding and support for Rangers in this case, or veterans, or for the other groups that they're supporting. So organizations like this are very, very important. And you mentioned one of the organizations, Service to School, and I'm very, very grateful for your donation on my behalf to them. Service to School I serve on their board of directors, and it is an organization that focuses in on providing mentorship and assistance to veterans to help them get into our nation's best schools. And they pay particular attention to enlisted veterans and trying to get them into really good schools. And I talk about great schools, I'm talking about schools like Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, University of Chicago, really the top tier schools around our country. Oftentimes some of our young veterans, as they separate from the military, think they can't get into these great schools, but in fact they can. They've got great life experiences, and this team at Service to School is really designed to help them do that. So it's a great organization that really, I think, helps promote opportunities for people, veterans in particular, to get out and do things. I'm very, very proud to be associated, and I thank you again for your support of them. I actually had an opportunity this week also to support another nonprofit that some of you may be familiar with, Gallant Few. They run a periodic podcast here. Their leader is a former Ranger, a former colleague of mine, a good friend by the name of Carl Monger, real good man. And this organization kind of helps with some of the transition activities for veterans, former Rangers, as they make the transition from the military to kind of the private sector and back into the civilian world. And Carl has got a real passion for this. So he invited me to be on one of his podcasts this week, and it was a really enjoyable opportunity. One, because it was great just to chat with Carl, but we talked about a pretty interesting thing. Interestingly, one of the questions he asked me, "What's your best memory from the Rangers?" And of course, my response was the skits. And for those of you that have been around the Ranger battalions or Ranger organizations, know that usually at the end of an exercise or some key event here, the troops, the Rangers put on skits, and it's their opportunity to poke some fun at the chain of command and let a little air out of everybody's tires and kind of level things off. And what I shared with Carl is that sometimes that comes back around. And when I left as the commander of 1st Ranger Battalion, they did a little skit, and the lieutenant who played me in the skit, at the time we were wearing that kind of goofy haircut, the high and tight, and I always kept my hair a little bit longer on the top. It certainly wasn't a mohawk, but I certainly could see how people might think of it like that. But he replicated that in his skit, and he was pretty hilarious. It was pretty funny. But later on, that young lieutenant became a young major, and when I was the JSOC commander looking for an executive officer, he came onto my roster, and I was actually able to interview him and bring him on back as my XO. And I always reminded him that this was payback for the skit that he did. That everything has a payback somewhere down the line. So real fun to be part of that, and great organization itself. I also this week, actually they published it this week, but supported a Google sponsored event called Serving Veterans, the Serving Veterans Initiative. And what this is Google, and it's the person who is leading it is a retired Army colonel by the name of Bill Osland, and Bill and I have served together a number of times, but he's a former 175 Ranger, 75th Ranger Regiment Ranger, long service in the regiment, in the Special Operations community. But he's organizing now, works for Google, and this is Serving Veterans, really focuses on providing information and resources to veterans who are dealing with PTSD, addiction, mental wellness issues. And I was very, very proud to be able to get on and talk about PTSD and talk about my experience with it, my experience as a leader, and my observations of it, and share some insights into it. And my comments are really focused on encouraging veterans to seek help, to not be afraid of asking for help. And one of the things that I've learned over time in my 39 years in the military service, and really now as in kind of in the civilian sector, is that it's important to recognize that everybody is dealing with something, whether you're a 4-star general or whether you're the youngest private in a Ranger battalion. everybody has got something they're dealing with. And it's really important to recognize that. And we have to encourage people to reach out and ask for help, and particularly when they're individuals that are dealing with the effects of PTSD and stress or addiction or other things that come along with kind of the military, or in this case, the Ranger life, and which is considerable, and we need to really support it. And I'm glad to see an organization like Google, big and sprawling as they are really dedicating some not only manpower but some resources to this effort. I think it's really important. We're served well by all of these types of organizations in our society. This wasn't always the case, but maybe it's a positive byproduct of being at war for 20 plus years, continuously for 20 plus years, that they've given rise to these types of organizations. They're really, really important. I want to talk a little bit about Rangers and the role of Rangers, and kind of how I've watched them change over time. I'm a little bit removed now. I've been out of uniform here for about 18 months, but I still try to keep up on things. And the perspective that I try to look at this, as Travis indicated, was as kind of a former Ranger Regiment guy. And having seen that organization operated within it, and then certainly seen it as the JSOC commander and at SOCOM, and then at CENTCOM as well. And there's really three things I think that really stand out about the role of Rangers as it's kind of modified. It's changed over the period of time. I happen to be the regimental commander on 9/11, and so when we deployed to Afghanistan and then a little bit later to Iraq, I really had a chance to see how this organization could operate in that environment. And we entered that period as a really good organization. And for those of you that are around at that time, knew we were focused on things like the big four, mastery of physical fitness, marksmanship, medical capability, and expertise in our small unit drills and skill drills and collective tasks. And we've really, really focused on that. And I think that served us really, really well. We were a pretty strictly organized organization. Everybody, all the battalions and the regiment pretty much looked the same. We had a very common leader structure that was in place there. And we had very clear understanding what our missions were. At the time, we'd spend an awful lot of time focused on really two big missions, conducting raids and seizing airfields. And, while especially the seizing airfields wasn't something that was really needed for us, with the exception of just a few instances during the broader global war on terror, our focus on mastering these things, I think, really set the organization up well as we kind of got into the sustained fights we found ourselves in Afghanistan and Iraq. And what I observed was an organization that really transformed itself following 2001. Became much more integrated, much more impactful. When we first went to Afghanistan in 2001, operating with other special operations forces, the Rangers were generally kind of referred to as a tier 2 organization, kind of a supporting organization to some of the other higher priority or tier 1 organizations. And that was a little bit of an impediment to us. It was something that we had developed in our culture here, but it was something that we had to overcome. And because the Rangers, they were so well trained, we could become more innovative, become adaptable, become flexible. We could easily take on technology. I think back to what the regimental talk looked like in October of 2001 when we first deployed. We were largely an acetate-based, operations center, and what it looks like today, it's night and day. Many of you who have experienced certainly understand that. So it's quite significant. But throughout that process, managed to completely erase this idea of a tier 2 organization, somebody that was supporting others and actually became a leader in this. So, this transformation that took place has been key, and it's something that's continued to change with this organization. And you look inside a Ranger Battalion day, it looks a lot different than what it looked like back in the 2001 one time frame when all of this began. They've adapted, they've brought on additional capabilities, they've added organizations to handle the technology. They're much more capable. So that's an important aspect of it. And that's an important aspect of Rangers is the ability to transform and be what the nation needs us to be at the time. Second thing is the Rangers have, I think, have continued to always kind of set the example for others. You know, the Rangers have always been an example of what right looks like. You know, I've talked a little bit about this mastery of basic skills. When General McChrystal was Colonel McChrystal as the regimental commander, he instituted this idea of the big four. Hey, we're only focusing on these things right here. They may seem basic, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to master these things. Fitness, marksmanship, medical capabilities, and small unit skills. That was very, very important. It was an important example that we set for the rest of the Army and really the broader military. And you began to see other organizations take on that type of focus with us. Our culture, our lead the way culture. That is, we know we need to be in front. We need to break the ice, break the trail for others as we move through this is something that is really, really key here. And then, of course, just the excellence that has been developed in training and fighting here. So this another important aspect of the Rangers is this setting the example for others, and this has been an important part throughout the evolution of the Ranger Regiment and Ranger organizations. You know, going all the way back to World War II, but especially with our what we kind of term our modern day Ranger battalions, you know, that have formed since the 1970s, and this will continue to be a really important aspect. The last thing that I would say about the you know the role of Rangers here is that the Rangers have always provided a leadership factory for the Army and for the Department of Defense. You know, in the beginning, this was largely about small unit leadership. It was about squad leaders, team leaders that really exemplified exactly what we were looking for in that level of leadership, or platoon leaders, company commanders. You know, we focused on bringing in platoon leaders who had been successful platoon leaders before, company commanders, battalion commanders who had been successful at that level before, because we wanted to create excellence in leadership. And that really, really paid off. And now we've begun to see that propagate. We've seen it propagate for years across the Army. And I'll share an example with you in just a moment. Along the way, the Rangers, and through their leadership factor they have created here, have really helped generations of officers and non-commissioned officers understand the roles, understand what's the role of officers, what's the role of non-commissioned officers, and the things that we're doing here. And that's been really important. Many of you have heard about Abrams' Charter. You know, Creighton Abrams, the chief of staff when the Ranger modern day battalions were reformed back in 1974, made it a part of this charter that you know, with these resources, with this development that came with serving in the Ranger Regiment, that, you know, the expectation was that excellence at the officer, non-commissioned officer level, and at the soldier level to some extent would be developed in the Ranger battalions, but then would go out and populate the Army. And that's been an incredibly important aspect. When I was a battalion commander in 1996 at 10th Mountain Division, I commanded the Light Infantry Battalion up there after having served a couple times in the Ranger Regiment. I was the only battalion commander in that entire division who had actually served in a Ranger battalion, and or the Ranger Regiment for that matter. When I went back several years later, every infantry battalion commander had served in a Ranger battalion. And then when I went back even further, that had extended out to the combat support organizations, artillery, engineers, others that you know, other formations out there with people that had experience in it. So, you know, this idea of Abrams' Charter was a really important aspect of the impact that Rangers have had. My sergeant major and I, when I was the SOCOM commander, we went to an Army senior leader conference. It was kind of the 3-star commanders and sergeant major, senior enlisted advisors and above that all congregated at I think up at Andrews Air Force Base for a conference that the chief was having. And and my sergeant major and I were there, and we were looking, and we just looked around the room. And as you looked at the TRADOC organizations, you looked at the different corps, you looked at everything else here. What was amazing to me was about 70% of the officers and NCOs had actually served in the Ranger Regiment. This is what Abrams Charter actually has meant for the Army and for the Department of Defense. It's been this taking this investment that we made in this organization and in the leaders in terms of it, and gotten it out to the force. And along the way, not only made organizations like the Rangers the best, but we made the Army better. We made the Department of Defense better. One of the key things I did when I became the CENTCOM commander, I'd been the SOCOM commander, so I wore the tan beret then. But when I went to CENTCOM, I actually had my aide design a special flash that I could, for CENTCOM, that I could wear on my tan beret, because I wanted people to know that, that we were living Abrams Charter here, that, while I'm really at this pinnacle assignment that is kind of represents the broader force here, that, my heritage really came back to the Rangers. I thought it was a really important thing to do, and something I was particularly proud of. But as we move forward, I think the Rangers are going to continue to play that role of being a transformational organization, and an organization that changes things and moves quickly, that's very adaptable. That's really important, and that hasn't always been our strength, but it's become our strength. And and it's really important because people look to the Rangers to see how they should be doing things. It will continue to be an organization that sets the example for others, just in how we do things, how we approach problem solving, how we approach our positions, how we approach, sustaining excellence. We will continue to do that, and certainly it will continue to be a leadership factory for the Army and for the Department of Defense, and those are going to be important roles going forward. So let me just close my comments here by just with a few other comments here. And as I was kind of getting ready for this, I actually pulled out my Ranger handbook here. I have it. I graduated. I actually started Ranger School on the day that Ronald Reagan was elected president of the United States in November of 1980, and I graduated the day that he was inaugurated in late January of 1981. And I was looking through my Ranger handbook here. It's got a lot of handwritten notes in it and things that I'd taken. It actually has, for those of you, really a little bit of a throwback. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. Protractor. It's just how we used to navigate. That's just how we used to read maps. I've always kept that with me as a reminder of kind of where I came from. And I think that's the message that I want to end this evening. My comments to you this evening is the importance of remembering where we all came from. And for all of us on this call tonight, the one common place that we all came from was from this experience of graduating from the U.S. Army Ranger course. And some went on to serve in the Ranger Regiment, some went back out to the Army and did other things. Some made a career of it, some served a few years. But I think it's always important to kind of remember the life lessons that come out of Ranger School. And I think they've always been very, very important to me. And I would just share a few of them that really stand out for me. When you think about at least what we call the Darby phase, or I guess the Benning phase of Ranger School, I think there's two big lessons that really stood out to me from that experience. First was that leaders are responsible for everything the unit, their outfit does or doesn't do. You can remember back to what your Ranger instructors were trying to instill in you, that if the one member of your squad wasn't ready, it was your responsibility to make sure that they were ready. And I think that's a really great life lesson. And we see this all the time now in our culture, in our media, the importance of leaders taking responsibility for their organization. The old idea that many of our presidents had on their desks of the buck stops here. This is it. I'm responsible for this. That's a life lesson that came out of Ranger School for me. The other one that came out of that part of Ranger School for me was the value of living simple. Carry what you need, distribute the weight, and get rid of excess baggage. I mean, this is a pretty important lesson right here. One that you know, it seemed pretty practical at the time you were going through Ranger School, but as you kind of think about it now and in your lives, I mean, this is really important. Living simply, taking what you need, sharing the load, you know, carrying your share of the task here, and helping other and making sure other teammates are doing the same, and then getting rid of things that you don't need. You know, whether it's mental things or physical things or other obstacles in your life that are preventing you from moving forward. I think it's an important lesson. I think that's reinforced by the Ranger experience. You know, when you think about the mountain phase of Ranger School, two lessons stand out there. One is the idea of check everything. You know, there used to be when I went to Ranger School. I presume it is the same now. They used to make fun of the young lieutenants came out of West Point, and they always accused us as we were getting ready to rappel down the side of Mount Yonah there of orchestrating the West Point hookup, where you made a mistake when you hooked up and ended up invalidating your whole hookup, and if it wasn't for the RI, you'd have come down the side of the mountain without the benefit of being attached to a rope. And that's a hard reminder, I think, of checking everything in your life and making sure you're prudent about that, and preparing yourself for what's coming next. I think the other thing is you learn to, you know, the other lesson that comes out of the mountains is the idea of learning to trust and learning to be trusted. Think about your ranger buddy who was on belay for you, and the fact how much you put your life into their hands, and how important that was to be able to trust that person, and then when you were on the other side, to be trusted by your ranger buddy up there. This is, I think, an important life lesson: learning to trust and learning to be trusted. And then, of course, when you think about the Florida phase, there's a couple of lessons to go there too. First of them is for those of you that navigated down the Yellow River in a rubber boat, or whatever today's equivalent of it is, Zodiac, I guess. You know, the lesson of the Yellow River is give way together. You know, it takes everybody to move the boat forward. If the left side and the right side aren't in sync on this, then it's not going to work, and you're not going to get where you need to be. So this idea of giving way together, I think, is an important Ranger life lesson here. And of course, the final one is, I think, it comes out of the Florida phase here, is the lesson of being able to go the distance. You have to go the distance. You know, when I went to Ranger School, I don't know if they do it now, but they kind of built you up to what was ultimately the 12-day patrol, the long patrol in Florida, where you kind of had to sustain yourself and your organization for a long period of time. You had to kind of go the distance in terms of that, and you learn to pace yourself. You learned to sleep when you can. You learn to you know, manage your load. You balance your food for a long period of time, and you know, and conserve your energy for when you actually needed it to be sharp. And you learned how to operate when your mental faculties were being stressed by tiredness or fatigue, or by stress that was being imposed on you by the ranger instructor or the positions that you held. So learning to go the distance and learning to deal with that kind of stuff, I think that's an important lesson on that comes out of that. So I think I'll stop there. It's been great to be with all of you tonight. I'm just so honored to be recognized by you, and I look forward to our questions and answers and discussion that comes out of that.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the comments. We've got a few questions come in. I'll just take them in order, and of course, Ranger being Ranger and struggling with technology, a number of these have come in over the chat system instead of the Q&A, but we'll make our way through. The first one I got is you talked a little bit about the challenges that you had in Ranger School. You talked a little bit about the leadership skills that you learned in Ranger School. This Ranger's question is, over the course of your 39 years in the service, what was your largest leadership challenge, and how did your experience as a Ranger contribute to how you handled that?
That's a really good question. I'll tell you one of the big challenges I had, and I really recognized it about the time I was a 1 or 2 star officer, and was rising in the ranks. And it was the fact that the people that were working for me, as I was a general officer at the time, but the young enlisted younger officers were much more technically enabled and much more technically capable than I was. And I struggled hard with that. And I thought that I really tried to work hard to make sure that I had the same level of technical savvy that they have. But ultimately, I realized that while I could become familiar and I could make myself a little bit better in that, I would never be able to match the capabilities of the people that worked for me. So the lesson that I learned was that I had to trust the people underneath me that were working within my organization, and that had a better understanding of the technical capabilities, and that they would be able to apply that, and that my responsibility was to was to provide the right mission, was to provide the right guidance, was to provide the right environment for them to really optimize the employment of that. But to me, that was a pretty critical challenge for me as I continued on in my military career, and got more out of the tactical realm and more into the operational and strategic realm. As I had to learn to trust the people that were underneath me, who were much more technically enabled, much more technically capable, and had a much better idea of how to leverage these very unique capabilities that we had in ways that I would never have been able to do on my own. And that to me was, and when I talk to groups to this day, I always remind them of that leadership lesson right there, the importance of being able to recognize expertise, recognize your own limitations in terms of things, and then rely on other people to kind of help the organization through those particular areas. Great question. Thank you.
This next question, I'm going to take actually 2 separate questions that have come in, one over chat and one from Duke Durkin, who is the president of one of our sister organizations, the Worldwide Army Rangers. In recent years, there has been a lot of talk about transitioning from a military that is poised to take on non-state actors into a military that is better prepared to engage in great powers competition and things of that nature. That has led to some pretty dramatic changes, both in the large army as well as in the special operations community. So half of this question is, where do you foresee the Ranger Regiment fitting into the United States' capabilities going forward? I think that most of this group is pretty well versed in what the story is to how they got to where they are today, where they're taking on non-state actors and filling the role that they have. But there's a lot of questions about where are they going to end up as we get into this transition. And then the second half of the question is this really just a repeat of some of the mistakes that were made in prior histories, where you had Ranger units that transitioned into role, either were disbanded or transitioned into underutilized roles? So I think that encompasses both of the questions that we had come in.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Duke, and great to hear from you. If this is the Duke Durkin, I think that it is. I remember visiting you and Ranger Turner down there in the 175 Special Skills Building. That was always one of my most enjoyable trips as the S3 and XO, to come down and spend a couple hours with you guys down there looking at stuff and talking about cool Ranger stuff there. It's good to be connected with you. Thanks for staying engaged. Thanks for the question. So, this idea of great power competition and versus kind of what we've been doing for the last couple decades here, focused on combating terrorism, I think is a really interesting one. And I know for certain that the current SOCOM commander is dealing with this one. And I had an opportunity to be in a forum where he was talking here a few weeks ago, and one of the things he reminded us of was that special operations community and the organizations like the Rangers are going to continue to be relied upon to stay focused on the combating terrorism mission, while we are necessarily focused on great power competition, because it does pose an existential threat to our nation. None of these other threats have gone away. So continuing to maintain excellence in that particular area and continuing to be engaged in this will be will continue to be very, very important for Ranger organizations. So I don't necessarily see the utility of those that necessarily going away. We had Ranger organizations during the last Cold War, and I expect that we will during this period of great power competition. I would also share with you that much like the Cold War, the great power competition we're going to be involved in some regards will play out in ways that won't necessarily mean big sea battles or land battles or things like that, but will play out in places where Rangers and other special operations forces and irregular forces operate quite normally and quite well. It's really important, I think, to remember that during the Cold War, the most successful effort that we had against the Soviet Union was one that we carried out in Afghanistan, working with the Mujahideen. And in this case, with a lot of our intelligence community partners and some military assistance there, that was really important. That did a lot to cause the ultimate collapse of the Soviet Union, and contributed in a very significant way. And I think that's going to be the case going forward. I think combating terrorism in places like the Middle East is going to be a way that great power competition plays out, and it will continue to be seen as very, very important. Our partners that we work with in places like the Middle East or other areas will continue to be concerned about this. They won't be as concerned about great power competition, and they will be looking to us for this. So I think this will be an important aspect. I also think that Rangers and perhaps SOF in general, it very much will be the force that will be out in the environment, whether it's training, working with partners, operating, and as a result, will be informing our decisions about what from a military standpoint, what the great power competition looks like. So this idea of Rangers and other special operations forces being sensors that can help us understand what's happening out there, I think will be very, very important. I don't know if this will lead to underutilization or some things with the Rangers. I certainly hope that it won't. I think the Army for sure understands the value of an organization like the Ranger Regiment and like Ranger organizations and Ranger training and what that means in terms of leader development and building the leaders that we need. I think perhaps the biggest contribution that organizations like the Rangers will make to this is producing leaders that are flexible, adaptable, comfortable with working through uncertainty, are masters of the basics, and they can take those skills out to the broader force, and where you may end up dealing more with some of these other manifestations of great power competition. So I don't necessarily think that it will. I certainly hope that it won't. I think the Army sees the value in that, and I would have every expectation they will continue to support that. And I'm not seeing anything right now that would indicate that's the case. And I hope that it stays. I hope that it stays that way.
One real quick follow-up on this is on Duke's half of the question that I sort of combined. He's wondering if you can speak to any insights on the development of a joint IED task force in conjunction with the asymmetrical warfare group and what's been going on in that arena.
Yeah, that's a great question, and now I kind of understand the context of why you're asking this, Duke. So, one of the things that after I had commanded the Ranger Regiment, I was assigned up to the Pentagon, and this was in kind of the late 2003 period. And I got up there, and I was actually working in the Army Operations Center as one of the officers in there. And I got tagged to organize an effort here for the Army, but ultimately became the broader joint community, to help us address the threat of improvised explosive devices. And we kind of stood up a little task force. We called it the Army IED Task Force, and we saw the goodness in what was being done there, and it ultimately became a joint effort, and then ultimately became a department-wide effort that worked under the Deputy Secretary of Defense, is where it kind of ended up. And this organization that we kind of stood up in an ad hoc fashion was really focused on doing three things. It was focused on helping develop the technology and the equipment and the capabilities that were needed to defeat this. It was focused on providing the training for our forces to make sure they could effectively operate in this environment. And it was focused on supporting the intelligence development that allowed us to actually target and go after the people that were perpetrating these attacks on us. So it was a really a fulsome effort to get after that. While we were doing this, at the time, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Dick Cody, came to me and said, "Hey, what I want you to do is I want you to stand up an organization that thinks differently, that understands these different kinds of threats that we're dealing with, and can help inculcate that across the Army." And that kind of gave birth to the Asymmetric Warfare Group, an organization that recruited people from across the Army, and in some cases across the military, and brought them in there and brought a different thought process to how organizations ought to look at the irregular, asymmetric threats that we were dealing out there. Not just IEDs, but different ways that we were going to deal with things that we were experiencing. And so this organization stood up here, the Asymmetric Warfare Group, about the 2005, 2006 timeframe, and became a pretty prominent organization. I understand that there's been some recent decisions made here, Duke, that organization maybe stood down. I think that's a mistake. I think it's a little bit short-sighted. If there needs to be some right sizing of it, I understand that a little bit more, but I am a little concerned about the direction that the Army is going in this regard, because this was very, very important. And this is not something that's gone away, frankly. And this will be a component of great power competition. I mean, the great power competition isn't so much about a cataclysmic fight with the Chinese at sea or on land. We're not trying to do that. It's going to play out in the gray zones around the world. It's going to play out in much more indirect ways. So organizations like the Asymmetric Warfare Group and the things that they were doing and trying to inculcate, I think would be very, very very, very helpful as we move forward. And I'm a little disappointed that we've taken what appears to be a short-sighted view on that. I don't know if there's an opportunity to influence that. I hope that someone would reach out to me and see if I could lend some support to that. I'm not particularly engaged in that. I haven't heard from anybody on that, although I understand that's what's happening. I think it's a mistake.
General, I know that you've got a hard stop coming up here, so I'm going to give you the last question, and then I thank you for your time. Ranger McAfee has commented on the fact that you've talked a little bit about the lessons you learned from Ranger School. You talked about how you've applied some of those lessons during your military life. He would like to know if you had to pick just 3 standards that you lived your entire life by and that you found most helpful, what would you identify those 3 standards as?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I think the first of these is I think you have to know yourself. And this is one of the things the Ranger School does so well. It really exposes where your strengths are and perhaps more importantly, where your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities are. And it's important for leaders, I think, to understand that. So, that's the first thing I think is important, is understanding where your vulnerability and where your weaknesses are. And I kind of shared one with you all here. I mean, I can get on the Zoom here, I can navigate myself around the computer, but I tell you, when it comes to the more technical side of the house, that's an area where I really have to pay attention to. And it's not an, excuse me, it's not something that I would be really, would be my strength. And so I think you have to know yourself in this. And this is, I think that's the first thing. Second thing I think is being responsible, taking responsibility for your organization. And especially in times when things did not go the way that you had expected. And I've had several of situations in terms of that. When I was when I was a CENTCOM commander, we orchestrated a raid down in Yemen, and we did it not long after the Trump administration had come into office, and it was really one of the first military operations they approved under President Trump, and the operation didn't go very well. It didn't achieve its final objectives, and in the process of it, we lost a valued operator, and we lost a expensive helicopter, and unfortunately, in trying to extract ourselves, we killed some civilians on the way out of it. It was not a good situation, and I wasn't the CENTCOM commander. I wasn't on the ground, but it was my responsibility. And I, when a week or so later, when I had to testify before Congress as part of my responsibilities as CENTCOM commander, it was important to take responsibility for that. I think, and I think that's what leaders do. You try to set the environment as best you can for those that work below you to succeed, and that's what leaders are really about here. And when it doesn't go well, you own the responsibility for it. When it does go well, you put the focus on the people that did it, and that, I think, is a really important leadership lesson. Taking responsibility, being responsible for the outcomes, especially the bad outcomes that sometimes occur when we're in combat situations and you can't control everything. I think that's a really important aspect. I think the third one that I would share with you is the importance of being a skilled and good communicator. And I always thought this was really important, being able to communicate well to different audiences, whether those audiences were young Rangers that you were talking to, or whether it was a senior leader that you were talking to, or whether it was members of Congress, or whether it was the press, or maybe even if it was the President of the United States. It was really important, I think, to be a skilled and effective communicator. And that means, and by saying that, it doesn't mean just being articulate with your words. It's about committing yourself to being an over communicator and being a proactive communicator. I think one of the most important skills to me as a senior leader was being able to, paint a picture of uncertainty and how things were changing in CENTCOM or SOCOM for people like the Secretary of Defense. I was during the most of the time I was a CENTCOM commander. General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, was the Secretary of Defense. And this is I'd been one of his task force commanders. I knew him very well. He was a very accomplished officer. He understood what was going on in CENTCOM. He'd been the CENTCOM commander. But one of the challenges that I had as we were orchestrating the campaign against ISIS and doing other things in CENTCOM was really making sure he understood what was happening, how things were transpiring with the fight, and where we anticipated that we were going to need help. So what I was trying to do the whole time I was always trying to paint a picture of what we were seeing, so that he had as good an understanding and as good of awareness of what was happening as I would. And I found that when I was able to do that effectively, it really helped me, and by extension helped the organization achieve our objectives, because he knew what was coming. He knew when I asked for something, the reason why I was doing it, and he understood the importance of it, because we had invested time in making him understand. So this idea of being an effective communicator isn't necessarily about having a great vocabulary or a slick presentation style. It's about being transparent. It's about being an over communicator. It's about being comfortable with sharing information across your organization and being willing to accept the risk of sharing information so more people know what's going on, in acknowledging every now and then something will get out and it might bite you in the ass, but frankly, that's almost always worth it because people know what's going on, and the importance of painting a picture for people of what's happening out there. And I got to tell you, I'm now 18 months out of uniform, and now I'm into the business world doing things. And I think all three of those things that I just cited to you: know yourself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses. Set the example for what's going on, and be responsible for the things that your organization is doing, and be effective communicator. These are just as important to me today as I now wind myself through a life of where I'm out of uniform as they were during the time that I was in uniform. So I hope that's helpful to you. That's a really great question. Thanks for asking it.
Thanks, General Votel. We appreciate it. I did see a question come in from Scotty Domage, who's one of the Gold Star mothers that has joined us today. She wanted to know if there will be a recording of today's presentation made available. Just like our last recorded event, which was the general membership meeting in July, there will be a copy of this put up on the website once we get it produced. I'd like to thank you for joining us today, General Votel. I really appreciate your time. I'd like to thank all of the Rangers and the Ranger community that have joined us as participants. I appreciate you guys coming out and supporting the U.S. Army Ranger Association. As I mentioned earlier today, we will be announcing the speaker for January in the upcoming weeks, so keep an eye on the website for that. And then, as I just mentioned a moment ago, this video will be put up on the website as soon as we finish producing it in a format that we can get it up there. Thank you for your time. Everybody have a great weekend, and Rangers lead the way.